All right, this is video number 3 of the Make My Course Accessible series. And in this video, we're talking all about control. And I know this is one that can be really tricky, especially for compliance courses and things like that. But giving enough control to a user is going to make a really big impact. And one thing that I found in the Design for All Learners Accessibility chapter 16, I think it is, by Judy Katz. She wrote this chapter on designing visual hierarchy with headings. So, headings is an important consideration, but she also really talked about navigation. And I thought this was a great chapter. And one thing that she noted is to unlock navigation as much as possible. And within a lot of our courses, I've seen at least that a lot of people kind of block that next button to make sure that the user has clicked through or reviewed the entire timeline or listened to the entire timeline. But in reality, if someone's using a screen reader, then they might not need the entire timeline to wait until that next button becomes available. So there's a few things that I did in the course when I first built it that I could have done differently in the control aspect. Now, there's also a book that I showed you the other day, and I totally forgot to mention the book, but it's called Designing Accessible Learning Content by Susie Miller. The reason I love this book is because it breaks down all of the WCAG standards and kind of gives you a way to actually implement these in the sense of learning content, because the WCAG standards were built for web content. And while e-learning is considered web content, it's a little bit different because we're trying to gain learning from it rather than being able to go to a website and find information on an event or buy a product or anything like that. So it's a little bit different. And so I love that she really highlights different things within those standards. So first, let's talk about the navigation. If I were to play the course that I built the first time, then you're going to see that I totally removed the navigation, which is something that I've seen in a lot of courses. People just remove the navigation. And I think a lot of times it was a way to make it very custom and to make it to where you can add custom menus or add all kinds of things, right? It just makes it a more custom experience, which I think that there's many times removing the navigation can be a great use case, but for accessibility, it's not always the best. So I will always remove the navigation when I'm using it a storyline block within Rise, just because the accessible component is still there. They're able to tab through your storyline block as if they would, but then they're also able to just kind of continue on from that block and continue in their Rise course. So when we're talking about storyline as a course by itself, then we really want to make sure that the user has some control over their experience. So when I start this course, you can notice I'm listening to the audio, or if I have a screen reader, I have no way to stop the audio other than muting it on my computer. And there's also only a button here that we talked about in the video yesterday. If I'm colorblind, I might not even be able to understand that this is a button or see that there's enough color contrast between this button. So there's not a lot of options here. So I'm going to do what it's asking me to do. And then we get into this introduction. And so there's voiceover going and it's coming on at the same time as the text, but there's no way for me to actually go faster or scrub through the timeline or pause maybe because I need to stop and hear that last message a little bit more. And then there's also that color contrast problem that we have hopefully taken care of in that first video that I just talked about. So here, it's just really not a great experience when we think about control. So what I did differently, first, you'll notice that slide where I had multiple different things coming on the screen at a time. So for here, you're talking about the role of an operations analyst and what you're going to be doing this week in your rotation. And so you have content coming up at different times. And there's a guideline 2.2, and I'm reading from the second edition of Designing Accessible Learning Content. Timing adjustable is a level A standard. It says, do not set time limits for activities in the e-learning resource unless learners can turn them off, adjust, or extend them. So I think about that with timers. Like if you're having somebody actually try to do something in a gamified type of experience, then you don't want to include timers, or you want them to be able to adjust them. But this is also very interesting. It says, also make sure that learners have control over any content which moves, scrolls, or updates automatically, as this also effectively imposes a time limit. So this is actually, in a way, imposing a time limit to where they're only able to see that content for a really brief, short period of time while the audio is playing. And there's no way for them to kind of scrub back and replay or stop it so that they can have more time to consume. So this is something that I used to do a lot in my courses and that I've stopped doing. And I'm going to show you how I've changed that in my accessible course. So from the start, my colors are a little bit different. And what I did here is I really just broke those out into 3 different slides. So now that content is, you're able to stop and play and pause and rewind and all the things at their own speed. So all of those 3 have been broken out into their own slide. Now I'm also going to show you, if I preview my project here in the accessible experience. Okay, so one of the first things that I added here was a way to navigate this course. So it's really just a starting point at the very beginning of the course to say, hey, these are the things that you can do within your navigation panel. And I struggle with this one because I always think that if an app or a software program is so intuitive, then you don't need to tell them how to use it. But I think that there's an accessibility aspect here where, even though it might be so intuitive that you can understand how to use it right off the bat, because there are options that kind of, if you hover over, you can see what they're supposed to mean. But I think this is a great way to just give some reference and also a starting point for people who may have never used a course like this before. And also it tells them, because some of these courses are always kind of built differently. So for this one, I put the notes and the transcript over here on this side. I've seen it bucketed over here. So there's a lot of different nuances. And so just giving them some choices here to view. And also this screen is not locked down, so they don't need to review all of these items to move forward. They can just continue on. And so within here, you can see that I have included the entire interface navigation pane because I want to give them the choice to be able to look at a transcript if they want to hear the audio and look at a transcript. I want to be able to play and pause the audio, restart it, change the volume, which they can do on their computer, but it's nice to be able to do this from the e-learning course itself as well. You can also show and hide captions. And so you'll notice I actually changed the captions to be more on brand as well. So it's the same brand font. You can do a playback speed and then some additional settings here. And so then I also added my resources, which I think is a very common thing, especially if you're using the interface. But keyboard shortcuts is another thing that you can add here just as an option that's in the player at all times, so that a user can start using some different keyboard shortcuts rather than only using a mouse to navigate your course. So also within your menu, you're going to see that everything is kind of clearly represented and stated, and it's not, they can also hide items, and it's not overly cluttered. And so another thing, so there was another point in this book. It was pause, stop, hide, level A. So this is another guideline 2.2, and it says make sure learners can pause, stop, or hide any content that starts automatically, moves, scrolls, or blinks for longer than 5 seconds. So that goes along the same vein where we want to be able, so the audio is playing, we want to be able to pause, stop, or hide that in some way. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, let me know.